We're going to start with the basics in our conversation. One of the things that's been said this morning is many of us are in different places on our journey of reading, interpreting, understanding, teaching the biblical text, and understanding what inclusive ministry looks like, etc. You all are very practiced, and so I want to start with the curiosity of how do you lead a congregation or a faith-based place that's full of people through a process or to move towards the kind of inclusive theology that we've been talking about today. How do you lead conversations that navigate tension around race, gender, sexual orientation, immigration status, and also economic justice? Mm-hmm. I know that's just a little tiny question. You probably have a one-word answer, but I'd like to let that sit there for a minute and then invite you, as you're led, to just speak to that.
I'll go ahead and start first. I think for the main way we move from a monoculture, more monoculture, I mean, there's really no such thing as a monoculture in the church, but into a more diverse congregation is really building relationships. I think that is so key because in the building of relationships, then there's trust. Yeah. And particularly building relationship with the pastor, with the congregation, because until you do that and they begin to trust you, then they will trust your leadership toward becoming more diverse. And I think that was the key for us, is to build trust first. And as we did that, then when we made changes and as more inclusive people started coming, it wasn't such a threat because they trusted you as a leader.
Trust and relationship. Very good. Thank you. Who else?
I think part of it too, I think we sometimes as leaders forget why we became pastors, why a church even exists. And if we believe a church exists for a city or a region, then the first part of us pastoring and people is active listening. And I can't be someone who's empathetic if I don't know what to be empathetic about. I can be humble if I don't know what it is I need to show humility about. So I believe part of it is for us to begin with the humility. I think it starts there.
With active listening to identify what it is and how I need to respond in the situations that exist. And then I can show forth a sense of humility and empathy towards the community.
Very good.
Another aspect of this for me is developing cultural competence, and I know that has been a lot of Dr. Leander's work in his book, and we connected over some of that, and I've been doing research in multiracial congregations in the Episcopal Church, and that has been one of the lenses I've been looking at. But developing our own sense of cultural competence to begin with, our understanding of cultural difference, cultural commonalities, in order then to be able to lead a congregation into growing in its cultural competence as a congregation and as individuals in that congregation.
Yeah, if I'm thinking about a couple markers for how I'm leading this conversation, one is to really think about this long-term journey, this marathon and not a sprint. We talked about us all being on our own journey. And I think just because I've maybe had 10 years to kind of think through this and work through this, if we're really building a diverse community, there's going to be some people in our church that haven't had 10 years to kind of think through this or wrestle through this. So I think in my own heart, realizing it's not just this destination, it's not this 4-week program that I can kind of push people through. And so though I have maybe a biblical goal in mind, there's also a patience in my heart for the Spirit of God to take people in their own journey as well.
Oh, thank you all. It's really beautiful and rich, lots of different layers there. So you either all are or have been preachers and teachers in congregational leadership. Tell us how you approach preaching and teaching in ways that normalize equity and inclusion, and invite the people, under your care, if you will, to lean into those values, to embrace them, to practice them, so forth.
Probably all have maybe just different philosophies, but I just think there's such rich resources like already in the Bible, and if I have eyes to see it, if I'm thinking about like maybe my preaching calendar for the year, maybe ahead of time, I'm looking for opportunities where the text is going to open the door to welcome me and our congregation to wrestle through some of these issues. So I really do think there could be value in doing a 6-week teaching series on justice or compassion or empathy. But sometimes when I'm not even planning a topic so directly aimed at it, it's just there in the Bible. And I think that actually provides like just a greater authority for our people to kind of respond to it, that it's not just a hobby horse of Pastor Gabe.
Nice.
It's actually, it's built into the story of what God's doing, and just allowing that to come out and to help people say, like, it's right here. It's right here in the text. Yeah.
That's a really beautiful approach, Gabe. Thank you for that.
I agree with that too, and also it's in the text, and with as the Spirit moves you, you will find these gems even in ordinary text. Even if you're following the lectionary, you will find these gems. But the other area too is in worship. I think that to include inclusiveness in worship is very important. And some of the things, and that goes, of course, age-wise too. We have had children, be part of worship, leading prayer. Even we had one young person, a teenager, preach for us. We also have switched things around, be creative in worship, where we demystify the whole stereotypes that we have of, like around Christmas. For instance, we had the senior citizens become Mary and Joseph. So we had 80-year-olds be Mary and Joseph, and other seniors were the sheep. And so, I mean, just to switch it around to make the scriptures fresh and to look at it in an inclusive way.
Oh, that's great.
And I'm going to pick up on some of that worship and some of what I've heard from different congregations. It's really important to have touchstones for people from different backgrounds. Praying the Lord's Prayer in the language of your heart, in a congregation that's bilingual with English and Spanish spoken as first language, the opportunity for people to pray in a different language was critically important. Using different types of music. I talked to one musician who said he's always very intentional about drawing music every week from different cultural contexts. Even if it's not necessarily somebody in that congregation now, it still creates that culture and context that says many different voices are welcome here. And then there's the below the surface aspects as well that are in some ways even more important. So the ways that, for example, a congregation approaches its use of time and that sensitivity, because people from different cultural backgrounds have very different approaches to that. The ways that emotions are expressed or not, how expressive you are, how much that worship leans into relationship or really focuses in a more almost task-oriented way to worship. Here's the script for worship and how we go along here. Or is there space that allows for attention to the people who are there as well?
Yeah, to add to all these
narrative of diversity, and we understand that with any change, with any kind of diversity, there's going to be tension. It's impossible to have change without tension. I think the failure is if we lose the consistency in our language and our tone. Because it's easy for us to say, here's what's needed, and we start, but the moment we have friction, we stop. And so if we want there to be change, if we think about the church culture changing, whatever it is, We can't stop because there's some friction. We have to lean into it, understand why it's there, and if we believe that God is taking us there, then we have to remain consistent in our language and the tone. Because it's easy for me to say, I'm Black, which we have to explain to my church, hey, there's a difference between being African American and being Black. Now, it doesn't change what you see. You see, this my skin tone, and you're like, this is where you fall. But born in Jamaica, not born in America makes me Black. And so even understanding that my wife was born here, it's a biracial, marriage. but so you find things such as that when we're talking about with our language. I can't come forceful and say, try to, lean into my beliefs. And so we understand diversity exists. Understanding that the moment I say something, it can bring some friction, some tension, but lean into it because it's necessary. And so ensuring that there's consistency in our language, consistency in our tone, and that way people can at least appreciate the direction, even if they don't understand and agree.
Oh, that's nice. You all brought such different wisdom. I really appreciate that. And Dr. Garfield, you are sort of leading us towards one of our preparatory reflective questions. So I'm going to go ahead and go there. You talked about beginning to experience tension, maybe even resistance. So let's think together about barriers that you have experienced in your own ministries as you have sought to lead ministries that are diverse, that are equitable, that are inclusive, that Dr. Leander calls ministries of reconciliation. What kind of spiritual, emotional, systemic barriers have you encountered? And if you're willing, what are some of the ways you've sought to reconcile those?
Particular way from my ministry as a priest. So the Episcopal Church has been ordaining women for about 50 years now. And when I started my ministry, I found myself in a number of different contexts where the congregation had never experienced a woman as priest and met all kinds of resistance from somebody who was a regular attendee at the midweek service, except when I was there presiding, to people, turning around and walking out the door or refusing to receive communion. So a range of those kinds of things. What I found in moving toward acceptance was relationship. That when the idea of woman priest moved to the reality of a woman as priest, it changed. And I think that applies across many different kinds of difference. That when we move away from this concept or the stereotypes that we have and begin to encounter an individual and relationship and see both what we have in common and what's different, some of those barriers just melted away. I can remember very early in my ministry visiting somebody and having a pastoral conversation that had nothing to do with the ordination of women. And I learned later that his opposition to the ordination of women had completely gone away in the course of that conversation because I came in my person and ministered to him. So that has been just a really important learning for me, is that importance of building relationship, of being myself, of not necessarily taking on the difference head on, but just of being there and being the pastoral presence. And then the importance of self-care. Dr. Flunder was talking about that this morning, that where am I getting my support and sustenance? Because if I'm not attending to that, I am a complete mess.
I was going to follow up on that and say relationships again too. One of the resistance I thought might happen from our church is very mixed, not only racial-ethnically, but economically, because we have a large portion of our church that were formerly addicted, formerly incarcerated people. And one of the things that happened was one of our members is a staff person for a nonprofit that works with formerly addicted people. men mainly. And he approached me one Sunday and said, would our church accept these men coming to church? Because he was having it's a Christian-based organization. He was having a hard time finding a church that's willing to accept them. Because as soon as they came to a church and then people found out who they were and where they were coming from, they were made very uncomfortable. So I said, of course, send them to our church. But this, at that time, was a Chinese American middle upper class church. So I said, I don't know, really. I said to my husband, they're coming starting next week. I said, just wait, see what happens. I might be fired. It didn't happen because of relationships. They started coming, and part of our church worship, we have testimonies. We have open time for people to share how God has worked in their lives. These men were not afraid to talk about how God has changed their lives. And when they did that, people began not to see numbers or see abstract, these are these kinds of people. They saw who they were. And that began to open the church, changed us economically, but also changed us in a racial, ethnic way too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, our church is relatively by God's grace, from like day one, diversity has kind of been built into kind of just the ethos of our community. And I really do give God credit, because though it was something we were working towards and aware of, it's not something that I feel like we could have manufactured ourselves. That to say, as we continue to grow deeper with one another, I feel we'll experience some greater barriers as we have tougher conversations. I would just say sometimes just naming, hey, there are barriers here, is really, really helpful. And as a pastor and leader, recognizing, I loved Brian, he referenced Ephesians 2 and the dividing wall of hostility. I don't think I have the power to remove barriers in people's hearts. And if I put that on myself, I think I'll just get burnt out and discouraged. But I do believe like we're in conversation with this big and almighty God. And so I think something I'm leaning into even more is praying that the Spirit of God will do a work that only He can do. Now, I don't want to be the person that says we're just going to pray about it and not think about anything else, but I have to understand if there's people in our congregation that are struggling in certain areas, I as pastor leader can't remove those barriers in my own strength. I'm asking God to do something I can't. Yeah.
Important.
So one of the things I was just thinking about, I was going to let this question just pass by.
Were you? Nice try.
But I don't want this to be about women in ministry, but I want you to hear the heart behind it. So my wife and I were both pastors, both credentialed, and when we came here to the area, there's a big struggle with women in ministry, and for whatever reason. And so a lot of times when we have these challenges, we try to find the word, try to find more books to explain our way out of these tensions. But we don't lean into what God might be giving us on the other side of it. And so what I realized is that there's this clause where, elders should be men and different things of that nature. At the same time, you want to have, diversity of voices or a church board. I don't believe that you should have, men making those decisions for women. That's just practical. So what we did was, I realized there was this sense of emotional fatigue. And I think we can find a lot of emotional fatigue if we try to, pretend like something doesn't exist, which is what Gabe was saying, naming it. And the emotional fatigue was that there's a point where my wife, she was getting, okay, it's like, well, God, go ahead, they hired you, you do this. And I'm like, no, we're called, and our family is called, and I'm never going to be somewhere that is going to be excluding my family and how we operate. And so there was a simple text. We don't use elders in this church because we will never have to have the conversation about an elder should be a man with one wife. And so we use deacons, man or woman, and that's who serves in our church board, which allow diversity of voices. So we never have to have the conversation, not because the tension of others doesn't exist, but simply because we found a different way, which allowed us to ease the emotional fatigue that exists throughout our churches. Because a lot of times, if that's taking place, then something else is taking place. And before you know it, we're saying, maybe God is not calling me. And so we allow ourselves to rest in this sense of discomfort and then question our calling, in opposed to finding other ways that God might be providing for us. So rather than saying, let me prove this, and here's another woman in the Bible. Hey, so we use Ephesians 4 to talk about the gifts, the fivefold, and there's no distinction. But then we're using this sense of, let's just use deacons for a board. We never have to talk about it again. And I realized that there's so much peace across the congregation, even if the tension exists, but we just won't talk about it because we don't have to. And so life goes on, relationships are great, and everyone live in their tension. And that's just how it is for us. Break the barrier.
That's awesome. And you all have done a good job leading me. So you all have talked in different ways about diversity and barriers and challenges. Let's think about church leadership, and how do you think a church leadership should reflect the diversity of the body? And two of you have already mentioned gender. One thing I have said for years in places that hold the woman card business is there are women in these churches, and why is it okay for women to have a male pastor, but it's not okay for men to have a female pastor, right? So if there are women in churches, there ought to also be women in leadership. But what about all the other kinds of diversity that we're talking about, whether it's ability, or if it's hidden things like Dr. Leander talks about, even like neurodivergence, things like that. Folks who are LGBTQ, so forth. What do we do about our leadership teams, and how do we help them reflect the people that we're serving? Because it matters so much, right? To be a part of a community and see yourself in leadership.
In leadership, I think the approach that we had at our church was everyone is called to be a minister. And if you are called, God has put in your heart a calling, a passion for something to serve God. And whatever it is, go ahead and do it. And we as a congregation will support you, pray for you, make it visible to the whole congregation, and even give some funding to what you want to do. And so in that way, that it kind of grows from there. As far as the key leadership, for instance, we do have a church council. We don't have deacons, we don't have elders, but we have a church council. And to be on the church council, there's only one requirement really, is that you're a member of the church. Because we do have people leading ministries that are not members of our church. They, eventually they may join, but that's not a requirement. But to be on the church council, you do have to be a member. And for that particular area, we look for people who have the character, what we call the character of what of a Christian leadership, but also has had some familiarity with the church. So we look for those two things: some maturity as a Christian, and what we try to do is recruit, but also mentor new people, so that no one has a lifetime membership or no lifetime
Appointment
right. to leadership. So we try to recruit and also mentor new ones. And I'm just glad that has been happening. Even as I left as a retired minister, it's become much more diverse even since I've been there.
Wonderful.
I don't know that I have. That the diversity in our church, the folks that are platformed and lifted up as leaders, is not something that I'm inauthentically forcing in this attempt to communicate to the world, look how diverse we are. So I'm thinking about the people that God has brought into our, I do think about it every week. Every week it's on my mind. I'm thinking about leadership. I'm thinking about our staff team. I'm thinking about people that are gonna participate in the weekly liturgy. So it's something that's always in the top of my mind. But I also want it to be something that is faithfully stewarded rather than inauthentically forced.
Nice, that's important.
Yeah, I don't know that there are good answers for any of that. Some of it is the balance over time as well, from week to week. Now, that's hard when you have somebody come in for 1 week and all of a sudden they look, and somebody texted me a picture from my church a couple of weeks ago, and there were 4 women up front, and it was like, yeah, in some ways, that's really, given the history, this is just really lovely to see. But also like, what, does that raise questions for people at some point?
Yeah.
But I also think about being sensitive to and aware of, particularly when whatever diversity you're looking at, if the difference, there are, some people feel particularly burdened and are always called upon to be the diversity person. And so being aware of that and sensitive to that, and giving people permission to say no to stepping into things, that I think is part of the inauthenticity as well, of really looking for the people who are called, who have that character and capacity, but always giving people permission to say no. I don't have any better answers.
They said it all.
Okay. I'll allow it, Dr. Garfield. So I'm thinking about pastoral approaches, particularly in dealing with folks who come into your congregation, into your faith community, into your space, who have experienced marginalization, exclusion, or even in some cases, spiritual abuse at other places. Put on your pastoral care sort of hat for a moment and talk to us about approaches for ministering to folks who have been so hurt in other faith spaces.
I just want to share a story here. Like I said, in worship, we have open testimony, and a young man had been coming a couple of weeks, and he got up and he said, I want prayer because next week I'm having surgery to become a woman. And our congregation was just silent. And then after church, one of our very leading people, also very much is on the more conservative side of theology, came up to me and said, are you going to allow this? Because I had prayer. We included this person in his prayer or her prayer. And she said, I'm going to leave the church if we're going to continue to allow this and to pray for this person. Why did you pray for this person? And I said to her, I said, surgery is a very dangerous thing. And I said, we can disagree on what's going to happen and why he decided to become she, but someone could die from surgery or be hurt. And I said, we can pray for that person to be safe, to have the surgery be successful, so that person doesn't get hurt or injured or whatever. And can't we do that? Can we pray for that person's safety? And she says, yeah, we can. So I think the pastoral approach there was say, okay, look at the humanity of that person.
Right.
And not just about the issues and so forth and the theological debate, but look at the humanity of that person. I think that's an approach that can be done.
Thank you for that, Katie.
I'm fine.
Right, that's right. We're tracking.
I would say that pastoring a diverse group is the long road you take. Emerge is one of those churches where when we started this church, we had a group of people who have been hurt by the church. Not just one, but all. And we're now heading into our third iteration of our mission and vision statement. Because each time they get healed, we have to assess where we are and and start again from that moment. And so we know where the long-term goal is. Well, we can't take them there. And so we measured the first year. Just the first year was all about healing, just healing everyone in. And then we said, okay, what next step can we take now that you're at a good place? And then we went through that place. And now we're heading into the 2.5 years now. And we're now saying, okay, how can we actually build a church the way that God designed you to really fulfill his purpose for your life? And so you're looking from that angle. It's easy for us to say, this is the mission of the church. And when you come in, we're going to assimilate you where you are, and that's just it. But we have to look at each person. I was meeting with someone, and he was kind of criticizing me in some sort. And he was saying, I sense that there's so much freedom people can do, and why don't you become more forceful? And so the reason, I said, so I hear you saying, but not only do I not have the power to control people, what I said to him was, everyone in this church, I know their individual story. And I know how to treat each person where they are and to walk them through where they need to be. And I think that's the biggest part of it, is about, doesn't matter how large the church is, it is possible for a pastor to walk slowly through the crowd and take the time to know each person's story and not try to pastor a building. And I think that's been the biggest part of us. We pastor the building and we miss the people. And so I try to make sure that I'm actually having a dialogue with each person that grow out to pastor them and not pastor this.
That's powerful. You don't have to respond, but if either of you would like to respond, we invite that.
To the question of how do I best pastor people that have experienced exclusion or marginalization, like personally, kind of just in my own devotional life, I'm thinking through how do I get my heart ready so that in those moments that God might give me, I'm able to show up well, I'm able to show up like Jesus. So I just think in my own devotion and meditation time, continuing to reflect on the exclusion that Christ experienced for me, and trying to, in the best of my abilities, to understand what he did for me so that I could belong and be a part of his community. Because there's a way where, like, I'll never fully understand what it's like to be a refugee from East Africa, no matter how many books I read or articles I read. And so in my own journey with Christ, going deeper and deeper in the exclusion and the judgment he experienced on my behalf, so that I can show up in a way that says, yeah, I want to love just as Christ has loved me.
Thank you, Gabe. Are you passing, Ruth? That's fine. Totally fine. I'm gonna ask the group one more question, and then mindful of the lunch and learn time. After I ask this question, give you each a chance to respond, I'm gonna foreshadow now that I'm gonna ask you each to offer kind of a word of hope to everyone to conclude our time, okay? I know you weren't asked to reflect on that ahead of time, so I'm giving you a few minutes now to think about that. But before we get to that final word of hope, Dr. Garfield, you actually sort of led a little bit into this question. You talked about knowing each person where they are and leading them through healing, and how even the evolution or the iteration of your congregation's mission is dependent on kind of those healing processes, and that you're doing this incrementally. You can't just move people to mission. So you are already kind of applying equitable decision-making processes as you even think about the mission of your church. So I want to ask the four of you to reflect on that a bit. How do you make sure that as you and your leaders, whether that's your council or your elder board or your deacons, whatever you call it in your space, are making decisions in ways that are equitable for those within you?
There are a couple of particular tools I've learned and experienced that allow different voices to be heard, and I think that's underneath it, that's what's really critical, is creating, using processes, creating contexts where different voices can come into the room. So one is the form of mutual invitation developed by Eric Law. So Eric Law is an Episcopal priest, Chinese American, and for those of you who don't know, the practice of mutual invitation in a group, I will speak, and then I will invite my friend over here, Dr. Garfield, to speak, who may or may not have anything to contribute, but has been invited to contribute his voice and say, I'll pass, I invite my friend, Dr. Choy here to speak. And so you go around and you don't talk back, you listen. And it's not going around, and so as you're going around, okay, they've gone, oh, it's my turn now, okay. And I'm sitting here thinking and counting till when it's my turn, because I don't know when my turn's gonna be. So that, I've seen that used effectively in a way that brings everybody into a room. Typically, when I'm organizing a meeting, we begin with some kind of question. And this comes out of community organizing principles, where it's, I'm not remembering the technical term for it, but I will say, what gives you hope today? Or what are you thankful for today? And everybody has a chance to respond to that question. And just by beginning a meeting where everybody is asked to say something, and again, they can pass, but everybody is asked to say something, even if it's just I pass, it communicates to the group that all those voices are welcome. The other really interesting one that my rector has introduced me to, and I don't know where it comes from, is called gradients of difference, which is a really interesting term. And essentially, you're rating things from I completely agree with this decision to I completely disagree with this decision, and there are some gradients along the way. So we did this a few weeks ago because we had to move the space where we were gathering for our midweek worship. And there are about 15 people who normally gather for that service. We had a couple of choices. And so it starts with everybody going around and giving their number. Where are you on this choice? Are you a 1 or a 6? And kind of, or a 5 or a 3 or whatever. And then looking at that. And then everybody gets to say why they made that decision. And it was absolutely fascinating to me. We have some people with various kinds of accessibility issues. We have a woman with some visual limitations there. And so going around that room, hearing where people were, and then everybody saying why they were there, and then coming back around again. We actually didn't come to a decision because people flipped, but there was not a clear decision. And so it was, okay, we'll try this, and then we'll try that, and then we'll come back to this again. So again, another process where we recognize there's a range of opinion, and it's not all just yay or nay. Now, you're not going to do that with every decision, but where there are significant decisions that matter to people, that's another tool. So just a couple of tools that I have found and experienced that underneath it, what we're looking for is a way to have every voice in the room heard or invited to be heard, and then affect what the outcome is for the group.
Very good. Does anybody else have wisdom for this question?
Yeah, I was just going to say that just to be aware of the cultural differences in how people access and voice their concerns, allowing different places where people can share what's on their mind. So some of what Dr. Ruth has mentioned is things that I have done, but the others is informally. In some cultures, they may have a third person, intermediary, come to you, and that's cultural. Others is, they'll come directly to you, or so you allow different places for people that can share what's on their mind. I think is really important, and there's no one way of doing it, especially you have a very diverse congregation. So I think that's really important to keep in mind.
Very good.
I would say I mentioned about the iteration
We're in, and I love what you both mentioned. And so as we're we're retooling our mission statement. Every church is called to fulfill the Great Commission. We know that. What we've done, which is unique this time around, we've actually had like brand new people to the faith on board helping us write the language. Former atheists, agnostic people.
Wow.
Because those are the people that we're called to reach, not the Christians, they're already saved.
Yeah.
And so how do we create something that is going to feel inclusive of those that we need to reach, which is why we said Emerge Berkeley, wanting Berkeley to know that we're here for them, and not just saying, hey, it's a church, let's walk through and tell you how, to live. Instead, we invite the voices that are different to say, how would we reach someone like you? And it was very interesting that when I saw someone, one of the, the person we asked, said, I would love for you to be on this team. And they were like, well, I'm new to the church. Like, I have no input. I'm like, that's why we need you. You don't have any kind of like, you weren't around us to say, here's what might work. Because so often, you get a lot of Christians in the room that put all the church's stuff. Here's the mission, here's this. But as long as we keep the focus of fulfilling the Great Commission, then I believe that it's important to have diversity in how we get there. How do we speak the language that is going to feel inclusive and not just something that makes me feel good, that I'm fulfilling what the Bible says to me? And I think that's just a unique approach that I believe is going to bring us into where God wants us to be.
Very good. You want to leave it, or?
I'm just soaking up all the wisdom, especially from these two and a little bit from Garfield.
Just a little.
I love leading. In my 20s and 30s, I probably just generally thought all the decisions I was making were great. And as I get older, and I'm realizing that my leadership is strengthened the more I learn to pull out from others. And so that's what I love the tools that were offered here, and I'll be stealing those. Yeah.
Very good. Well, we've come to the time that I warned you about a moment ago, and I'm going to ask you each to offer a brief word of hope to those in the room and to those that are online, and then we'll move towards the conclusion of our online program with a few announcements. So a quick word of hope, and I'll just go to the far end with Ruth, and we can move this way, and then I will wrap us up.
So my word of hope is sitting in front of me.
All right.
That there is a group of people willing to show up and spend a whole day talking about DEI matters and recognizing that that's there in so many places. People who show up.
Amen. Amen. My hope is that they trust God, basically. The Spirit is alive and well, and God will do great things even in the midst. And so keep that encouraging you and supporting what you are all involved with in your own ministries.
This is a word of hope to myself. This is good and really, really hard work. And as we show up, let's just remember God is with us, and He's a lot more powerful and wise than we are.
My hope is that we learn to live in the tension and continue to speak truth.
Very good. Thank you, Garfield. Thank you, Gabe. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you all in the room. Thank you all online, our faithful monthly audience who tune in just time after time to the First Friday Lunch and Learn program. The Lunch and Learn series will take a break in July for the Independence Day holiday and will return in August. I'm pleased to announce that our August presenter is the Vice President of Academics and Dean of the Faculty, Dr. Leanne Snow-Flesher, who's in the back of the room for those of you who weren't aware. She will explore the biblical text of Job in her presentation entitled When God is Silent. So watch your email in July for opportunities to register for that program. There'll be information about the First Friday series always on the website at bst.edu using the alumni drop-down menu. And as always, if you have people in your lives who have heard God's call to ministry service or who are considering seminary, please send them to BST. We would be delighted to journey with them through the discernment process. And again, thank you all online, and thank you in the room, and thank you to our wonderful panelists. We'll see you in August.